First mistake. Good evening, everybody. Try a second time. And welcome to this meeting of the Health and Environment Policy Committee, taking place in the Walton Suite in Winchester Guildhall, and we're kicking off now at 6:30. My name's Jerry Pett. I'm the Winchester City Councillor who's going to chair this meeting. It's being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available, and advice on how to turn these on is on our website. Please can I ask everybody, including myself, to make sure that mobile phones are at least on silent, if not turned off fully, please. In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, you won't get anywhere because the traffic's gridlocked, but the fire alarm will sound, and please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. And now turning to the agenda. So item number 1 is apologies and deputy members.
Thank you, Chair.
Please.
Thank you. So apologies for absence received from Councillor Latham and from Councillor Miller, with Councillor Horrell deputising. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Councillor Horrell. Good to see you. Declarations of interest from anybody else? Councillor Lee.
The standard declaration. I'm a trustee at WINAC, and clearly there's any conflict, I will do the necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. And I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of all the items, really, where they impinge on the business of the South Downs National Park Authority. However, as there's no material conflict of interest regarding these, I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer that enables me to speak and vote on these matters. Good, that's got all that out of the way. Next, chairperson's announcements. The only thing I've got to say at this point is members of the committee will be aware that we've had 2 working groups going, and they've been members only working groups. Officers have not been involved at this stage. We have a full-page report from one of them on nutrient neutrality that has been signed up to by all members other than Councillor Miller. Who is he? Councillor Horrell, is Councillor Miller away at the moment, or?
Chair, he is, I'm afraid, yes.
That's why I haven't had his confirmation of its acceptance. As soon as I do, I will pass that to the team to circulate to all members and to Councillor Lerney as the portfolio holder concerned. The second group is still working under Councillor Adrian Brophy, and that's moving towards conclusions. I think you're just going to do some more work with officers, hopefully in the coming few weeks. Yeah. Other than that, sorry, Councillor Lee, yes.
So I just wanted to ask a quick question on the nutrient neutrality task group, the paper that we've completed. I noted that there was quite a very useful push paper which was circulated following Councillor Powell's attendance. Does that perhaps necessitate a refresh? There seemed to be some very useful information. You may have a different view.
I don't think there is a need for a refresh at the moment, because whilst that paper is very interesting, I think we'll make sure that goes around with our piece as well to everybody, because I think it is in the public domain now, isn't it?
It is in the public domain, Chairman. I've not yet attended the meeting.
Okay, so we'll make sure everybody gets sight of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Reading it through, I think they're at the stage of having sort of bare bones of a framework in place, but not too much details. I think you observed in an email the other day. Yeah. Okay, thank you. The only other thing I would say before we kick off is we have 4 items on the agenda, 4 meaty items on the agenda. However, none of them are items of scrutiny as such. So whilst I would not wish to stifle reasonable discussion and debate, I don't intend to let the discussion on any of those items go on too long. And if I could ask members to be brief, and indeed presenting officers and councillors to be as brief as they can in their presentation, that would be appreciated. So next thing, minutes of the last meeting. Do we have any points to bring up on the minutes of the last meeting of our session on the 2nd of December? Or may I take those minutes as agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Next item on the agenda will be public participation, were we to have any. But obviously nobody, well, they all foresaw the traffic problems, presumably. So we do not have any public participation this evening. So we'll move on to item 6, which is the presentation on enhanced biodiversity duty. Councillor Lerney, thank you for coming to introduce this one.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This paper is required under our duty under the Environment Act 2021 to report on how we are considering biodiversity across the council, including associated policies and actions. But this is an area of work which we are deeply committed to. It's not just a tick box exercise, and we welcome both the opportunity to report on our work to the Health and Environment Policy Committee, but also to hear your comments prior to it being formally submitted. I think it's important to recognise that while we are reporting today on council actions and direct support in line with the reporting requirements, there is a lot more going on across the district to protect and enhance biodiversity than is listed in here. We have projects such as the Magnificent Meadows, the Hampshire Hedge, the Reimagining a Hampshire Estate project at Hinton Ampner, which is planting an extra 34,000 trees in the district over 3 years. An increasing number of our farmers are adopting nature-friendly farming practices. And of course, we have large organisations such as the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust at one end of the scale, and many neighbourhood and village conservation and nature groups at the other, all making a difference. Highlights from the past year are the adoption of the local nature recovery strategy and the nature improvement plan, the many grants to external organisations, and events such as our first Green Fair. On our land, actions have included scrub clearance and removal of invasive non-native species, new wildflower areas, the upgrades of 2 of our sewage treatment works to reduce nitrate and phosphate generation, and bat and bird works on our council homes. So that's a brief snapshot, but I do have Nick Cutler, our ecologist and biodiversity officer, and Rick Smith, the service lead for sustainability and natural environment, here to assist with any questions, and we appreciate hearing your comments on the paper.
Okay, thank you. The officer's going to do any further instruction, or so dive straight in. Right. Okay. Just one point from me. I mean, this is interesting because it's very much a statutory requirement that you're reporting against here. I just noticed one thing in my own village last weekend: 40 metres of new hedgerow was planted. And I'm sure that's not unique in the district. There are stacks of those projects going on in various greening groups and all the rest of it. Do we have any ability to capture all of that, or are we really limited to what we can do on council land?
We have been encouraging groups to report to us actions that they're taking. And where possible, we do record that. But as you say, it is quite difficult to capture everything that's going on, particularly because people aren't always measuring, for example, the length of hedgerow that they're planting. They just know that they've planted, X thousand new hedgerow plants. I was coming through the Hursley estate the other day, and you can see where they've been planting the Hampshire hedge, and you are literally talking about thousands of hedgerow plants. But I don't know if Rick would like to comment on how we might look to capture more of that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think one of the main areas, straight into my favourite subject, biodiversity net gain, but I think that's one where there's an element on this biodiversity duty, so the BNG, to report on that as well, and that specifically has a category for hedgerow. So whereas that might have been missed previously, I think we will get a lot of data on that now, on that delivery, and we'll be able to report on that. We've already got a lot of data on that, on what's being delivered. I think there will always be an element of under recording that we're not going to capture, but I think, as Councillor Lerney said, one element of the nature improvement plan is to work with communities, community groups, organisations, trying to get as much data as we can there. Hinton Ampner, with the stuff we do with the Wildlife Trust, that's on our own land, but we're encouraging them to sort of share that sort of data with us as well, not just hedgerow planting, but all sort of these nature-based solutions.
So yeah, I think we would encourage all members to encourage their parish councils and that sort of thing to report back in as much as they can. Okay, just before everybody else comes in, I would say there are bound to be points of detail in this that people will want to raise and have corrected or whatever. And I think we'll work on the basis that if there are points of detail like that, we'll collate them at the end and give you the chance to do the detailed work to address them. But before we go on, Councillor Brophy, you Councillor Lee first, sorry.
I just wanted to comment on the point that you raised. I mean, obviously parish councils vary in their scope and size in terms of what extra work they can take on, but they are uniquely placed to perhaps see what's going on, not necessarily to do the measuring, because that's quite a big task. And I'm just wondering whether there's something that can be done to guide them, encourage them. I mean, obviously, I think we as councillors do that anyway. But maybe a bit more of a nudge, which might be helpful to the NERT team and for us understanding what's going on. Because if it is a big undertaking, it could be, we were talking about nature credits and stacking and bundling. So why wouldn't you want to know that if it's quite a big thing? Then it may not be visible otherwise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lee. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, again, as part of the nature improvement plan, I think what we could work with is how, again, with communities, with parishes, but having those updates online as well. You know, that guidance on how to submit that information, how to get in touch with us in a usable way that we could then clearly report on. So I think that's the sort of thing that we're trying to improve on. And as we go forward with the nature improvement plan, we can make clear templates and clear direct routes to us to get that information really useful.
I think perhaps if we could get it in Parish Connect or something like that, and keep plugging it at all the sort of parish.
Yes, I was going
meetings that we
to
have.
suggest that we have a look at Parish Connect and our other contacts that we have with parish councils to encourage that. I think also being able to report back to them on what they've told us. A bit of competitiveness is often a good thing. If we show parishes what other parishes are doing, I suspect they may become more interested.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit worried about counting glory as the planting of a hedge. The success of a hedge lies in its maturity, and that's when it starts to support biodiversity. And I'm glad we've got Mrs. Pinnock with us, because developers seem to find hedges very inconvenient, and we do need to concentrate on retaining the ones we've got. And I think we may come back to that point later on when we look at BNG credits. I'd rather have a celebration of mature hedges than the fact that somebody put 50 whips in the ground and didn't water them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell, did you want to?
Chair, thank you. Perhaps one of the team could help me to understand page 41 and the composition of biodiversity gains in the areas. I was reading line 8 with woodland and forest. Could you just explain to me how those numbers work there on that page? I'm not really clear. So I just took H as an example.
Who wants to come in on that?
So we've got baseline at 4.12, but post development is still 4.12, although this is on a gains chart. Am I being stupid?
No. It is. This is, as Rick says, this is the wonderful world of biodiversity net gain. So it does get very, very confusing. But it's whilst it says net gain, it also counts retained habitats as well. And sometimes you can sort of obviously retain habitat and enhance it. So there is like a change in kind of units potentially, but also you still have the same amount of woodland present. This table in particular is taken from DEFRA's sort of template. So they helpfully produce a table for us to report back on BNG. So it is kind of set out in the way that the government said that they want it. Whether they'll make any use of it or not is by the by. But this is then set out on the different habitat areas using a defined kind of standardized way of classifying different habitats. What happens is we get given the metric, which is a spreadsheet effectively, and then the developer will fill this in with the habitats on site and then the habitats that are going to be remaining on site after development. So for example, if they've got a parcel of woodland on their land and they're going to keep it, it might be say 4.12 units on the baseline, but also because they're not touching it, they're not going to raise it, it'll appear again as the post-development as well. So that kind of hopefully explains it a little bit, although it is quite complicated.
I can see that the good people in DEFRA will be all over the relationship between biodiversity units and the number of hectares for each category. But if we want any of our constituents to make head nor tail of this, might it be useful to have some sort of key to go with that? Hopefully DEFRA give you that key anyway, and we're just case cutting and pasting.
Yeah, I mean, as Rick says as well, this is also in the nature improvement plan, so we don't necessarily have to do exactly what the government have said. This is the template. So for the next iteration, when we're reporting back separately on our nature improvement plan, we can obviously produce something a bit different and a bit more user friendly.
Right, okay. You're saying DEFRA haven't been too prescriptive then? Well, that's good to hear. Yes. Okay,
So yes, please to the key.
yes,
Thank you.
quite, yeah. Councillor Power.
Chairman, I have a series of questions on this paper, which I think might make it clearer for people if we did make small changes. Are you proposing to go through these a page at a time? I don't have anything before page 21.
Unless there's anything you actively want to discuss, if there's simple points of additional information you'd like to see, then I think if we can collate those and we'll get them into a supplement to the minutes or something like that, and get them to the team to address, if you're happy with doing it that way. Sorry?
When you think fit, Chairman, or would you like me to put them in an email, or
I
how do you
think
want me to handle it?
Unless there's something on which you want an active discussion, then if we just submit them in an email.
I was going to say it'd be really helpful if you could email the officers directly, just in the interest of time and speed as well.
Yeah.
They can make those. Thank you.
That's Brophy. Just a quick question on the monitoring of B&G. On page 33, it's mentioned about a monitoring fee imposed on developers to ensure that you have the adequate resource to be able to kind of follow up on any commitments made for net gain. I suppose the question is, do we have confidence in that the adequacy of the resource that we'd be able to keep up with that? But moreover, do we have a robust system of enforcement to make sure that we can hold people's feet to the fire in case they don't meet those? Because obviously enforcement has been a little bit of a contentious issue in terms of developers, not necessarily, meeting their commitments. I think alongside that, there's the kind of the public confidence aspect that we need to be able to say, if we're saying we're removing a habitat and a developer is committing to replacing it, how can we provide the assurance that it'll actually happen?
Sure, I can jump in there. Thank you, Chair. I think we're sort of going into the realms of planning specifics. Resource-wise, yeah, I think we've looked at the fees and charges and so on, and that's set out. We've done a lot of baselining. We've looked at other councils and so on. So, working with our planning colleagues, that's how we'll set those monitoring fees. And I think for the security and the certainty that we will be able to do better on that enforcement side of things, that's essentially one of the main reasons why B&G is in there. So it's measurable and enforceable. So we don't have to have a whole new enforcement team. The B&G governance will allow us to do that. So the report will come to us to prove that they've done what they've said they have to do. This is a 30-year long-term elements of enhancement and improvement for biodiversity. So yeah, there's an element that we'll have to do in terms of checking the reports, but it's not as if we're sending Nick and other officers out to check on site that everything's been done. So yeah, I think there's a degree of certainty on that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Looking at page 34, it's the third bullet point down. which I think is rather concerning. It says the location of off-site biodiversity units, no developments have been secured, B&G delivery solely through off-site units within the LPA boundary. Does that mean that we are denuded or don't have habitat banks or in the district, or maybe Hampshire, because it's only the Isle of Wight, so I notice might be arguably Hampshire, and therefore we are paring back our biodiversity net gain because it's not within our LPA?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so again, that's a sort of a, obviously it's linked to this, but the other issue of habitat banks is an element of work that is associated to this, that we're working with habitat banks for the potential, what's the market out there, what is out there. To a degree, we don't have full control over that. Private landowners, coming forward, offering that, and also developers, acquiring that offsetting sort of thing is another element of that work. But it is something that we are engaging with, potential habitat banks on.
Very quick supplementary, mate. Is there a fix coming soon, or are we going to be seeing our biodiversity going backwards because we haven't got those biobanks in the commercial market coming forward?
Yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing it going backwards. Again, the structure of all the legislation puts in place that the delivery of the enhancement and the improvement is in close proximity to the development. So that's why we'll be aiming to keep it within the boundaries as close as possible to where the development's taken place. And there's an incentive directly to have that as close as possible with, so financial higher costs for the further away you go, basically. You'd have to do more as you move further away. Anything else, Nick?
If I may, Chair, just to add to what Rick said, the Partnership for South Hampshire have like a dedicated environment team, and obviously Winchester is part of the partnership. And as part of that, the PUSH team, Partnership for South Hampshire team, are working actively now to identify land in Hampshire as a whole to bring forward for habitat banks. It might not be necessarily in the district, but it will be in Hampshire. I think they have been working quite closely with the Wildlife Trust as well to have that land taken from kind of solely private ownership put into like a long-term lease with the Wildlife Trust, so it will be managed for a long time. So the market's starting to materialise. We have had contact with a few sort of landowners inquiring about setting up habitat banks, and we've given them sort of information and help to an extent, but none of that has necessarily materialised just yet. But there is interest out there, I think, so it's looking promising.
Can I just clarify on that then? So there's incentive for B&G to come from within the LPA boundary, if you like, but we have no way of ensuring that or enforcing that it comes from within.
Yeah, that's correct. So the statutory biodiversity metric, which is submitted with an application, has a kind of like a multiplier kind of attached to it. So if the developer is providing units within inside Winchester district or the landscape character area, then there's no penalty. If they are providing units off-site, but it's outside the district / character area, then they may have to provide, say, double what they would normally need to. So there is an incentive to keep it on site and close proximity as possible, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to dictate what they did. We wouldn't be able to say refuse the application because they're providing units up in Cambridgeshire, for example.
Yeah, of course.
Is it worth also pointing out to members that the LPA and the district are two different things? So it could be that apologies, I was too busy getting the answer.
But I think that the principle of incentive applies to both LPAs. Yeah, I think. Councillor Horrell, you.
Chair, thank you. On the Nature Improvement Action Plan on page 30 and 31, it's helpful to understand all the different objectives. There's a report about SYNC amendments, creation and deletion. Where would one find that, Chair? Because I looked for it and I couldn't understand where that might be. SYNCs are dear to my heart and part of my ward. And also on the rather extensive list of activities where we're collaborating, enabling, there's quite a lot of work here. Are all these objectives linked back to, have we got sufficient people? Have we got sufficient money? Do we actually deliver what is a huge plan across a multitude of activities? Maybe that's more for the leadership team.
So I think, okay, so harking back to the discussion we had last year on the NIP, I think that was one of the things we covered then. Where do we see the full list of sinks and triple SIs and everything else, which I think we covered at the time. But and your second point was objectives in the NIP.
So my first point was, is that where I would find it then, the sink information? Is that what you're saying?
I'd need to look in the minutes of last time out so we can see what answer we got.
Right, thank you. And then it's linking the, you know, the resources to do this multitude of objectives. Maybe it's for the director to sort of advise, because we've got a lot of collaboration and partnership working, which is all excellent, but that's a huge list for the team to undertake across a multitude of activities.
It's a favourite phrase I hear in the Park Authority, that partnership working is difficult. What is the view here?
Well, if I begin, actually, we spent a lot of effort when we were writing the NIP to make sure that the action plan was commensurate with the resources that we anticipated having available to us. But clearly, I need to hand over to the people actually doing the work to say whether they're confident about that.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I think it is a tricky question, but it is the direction we want to move in, is working with those partners, working with organisations, you know, starting small but growing up. You know, we've got the example of the St Giles Hill Friends Group, where we've now, you know, working on some really good nature improvements in a site right in the city. We've got the Wildlife Trust, obviously, which we've got a long-term relationship with, but we do want to cast the net wider. We know there's work going on further afield, so it is really just setting up, I think, better ways that we talked about with Councillor Lee about getting information back from these sort of groups. But also, I think some of our aims, we want to be able to set up sort of exemplars as well. So we've got things such as management plans for rivers. You know, we would like to aim to be able to write a management plan for our own land ownership, put that out as an exemplar. You know, this is what we're doing on our land. We would like, you know, this is something you could do. These are some easy steps you may be able to do, and those sort of things to engage and enable, you know, with those sort of partners. I think is where we're trying to go.
And my observation would just be, it's the setting up of the partnerships that's the tricky bit, isn't it? Once you get a group of like-minded people together, it's difficult to stop them. Yeah, getting on with it then.
It is managing the stopping them that is the hardest part, in my experience.
I think if I come in, Councillor Horan, as well, from a leadership perspective, we've just done our round of service planning, and a key part for the sustainability team is about the embedding of the NIP and how we embed that. So as we think about priorities and budgets and so forth, as we move through our LGR journey, the NIP has still remained the #1 priority for the sustainability team to deliver, with the supporting budget and resource attached to that. So the commitment around that part remains.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at page 36, item B, where I find that 1,729 planning permissions had an exemption to the BNG requirement. I wondered why that might be, and it seems a very big number. Could we have some examples of where that would happen, please?
My own air source heat pump, which required planning permission but did not meet any biodiversity net gain requirement. I mean, obviously Mrs. Pinnock can expand on that, but there are a huge number of minor planning permissions where the requirement does not arise.
Julie, do you want to come in?
I would just say, yeah, we deal with over 3,000 planning applications a year, and they're not all development that are linked to BNG, although some are, but there are exemptions, and the government have been introducing those exemptions to sort of free up the planning system because they want to build 1.5 million more new homes. So there is that range of exemption in there as well.
Thank you. Right. Do we have any more for any more? Councillor Lee.
I was just picking up on the point the strategic director made, and I'm looking at the table about biodiversity net gain, and immediately my calculator is going, which gives us best carbon credit. We're going to be talking about this in a minute. So that's something that you know, it's a win-win if you can join this sort of thing up. And the other question I had was its maturity, isn't it? A habitat unit is a number, but actually some of the stuff takes some time to mature and provide biodiversity benefit. So I'm just wondering whether the presentation here might be done in a better way to demonstrate the meaning, because you know, a tree, a forest is going to take a long time, whereas grassland is going to produce by a hectare habitat gain, and there's a carbon quick gain as well. So I just think there's something there which could be smart.
I think this goes back to the point we made about having the key earlier that Councillor Horrell was asking for. That there needs to be some, or it would be really useful if there was some direct linkage between the BNG data in that table in Appendix 1 and carbon credits, so we can get that joined up picture. Can we leave you to ponder that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can look at that. I think it's just worth saying that, yeah, how we present it for that sort of public facing one, we definitely would be looking to make that a lot more accessible and user friendly. And I think that point about this maturity is taken into account within the metric. You know, there's the to be able to get to yeah, it's explaining that in our presentation there that we'll look at, but it accounts for the points delivered in the units isn't getting to that level of maturity or that level of biodiversity enhancement. But yeah, we can look at that and take that one away.
Okay, thank you. I think the sort of flavour I've picked up from all of that is that there's a little bit of work to do, perhaps to make it more user. I mean, I appreciate it's a statutory report and you've got to provide the data that you're required to provide. But there's a little bit of work that could be done to make it more user friendly and useful, both to members and to the general reader. I think on that note, are we content to accept the, I can find it back again in the agenda. I think we've been asked to get the wording precisely, to note the content, and we have indeed commented on the proposed biodiversity duty report, and the publishing deadline is 26th of March, so yeah, that gives you a good 4 weeks to ponder those things we've raised. Everybody content to move on that basis? Good, thank you very much indeed. As we all scroll through to the next one, which is back with you, Councillor Lenny, on supporting the creation of local carbon credits.
Yes, I will keep this brief as the agenda title is very self-explanatory, but keeping it brief, the creation of local carbon credits was the final pathway to reach net zero in our carbon neutrality action plan. And while buying credits is not something that this council has chosen to take up, we have been working on the opportunity to create carbon credits on our own land and elsewhere in the district. And Alex Eburn, our sustainability manager, is here to give you a presentation on carbon credits and the next steps. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Councillor Lenny. So my presentation is just a brief one, in addition to the slides that were circulated to you all before the meeting on supporting the creation of local carbon credits. And this one builds on an initial member briefing that we delivered 2 weeks ago that some of you may recall, which talked about local carbon credits alongside other nature markets in regards to BNG and also nutrient neutrality. This one does a bit more of a deeper dive into local carbon markets and local carbon credits and the role that we take as a council in facilitating and fostering those markets. So the presentation, the more detailed presentation, was circulated to committee members in advance of the meeting, and that covers the following 3 areas. First of all, it covered the strategic context, so that sets out why the council is taking action to support the creation of local carbon credits. It then had a bit more detail around carbon credits and markets, so how they work, and a summary of best practice standards around carbon markets. And then finally, the largest section looked at the approach that the council is taking to support the creation of local carbon credits. What are those various different roles that the council could take, and what work's been done to date and into the future in this area. First slide I've got here is just to summarise that strategic context section. The most important part set out in the report is in relation to the CNAP, that we have 5 key pathways which set out what we want to do in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. One of those key pathways, Pathway 5, sets out to support the creation of local carbon credits, which this work relates to. In the second section of the report, we go through carbon credits and markets, so introducing and defining what carbon credits are, the different types of markets and the types of credits that can be generated. It talks about carbon credit life cycle, carbon standards and codes, and also sums up best practice. So what are some of those best practice principles like mitigation hierarchy and spatial hierarchy? This slide is one of the ones presented in the detailed pack, which covers the council's carbon offsetting policy, which was adopted in January 2023. And in line with that best practice, it provides a hierarchical mitigation approach towards carbon offsetting. So focusing first of all on prioritising carbon emissions reduction in line with the mitigation hierarchy, and then looking at what are the best ways that we can then address those residual emissions that are remaining. And that is through, first of all, looking at opportunities to generate our own carbon credits on council land, and then looking at removing through other projects outside of the council land within the district, and then only as a last resort, looking to purchase credits from accredited nature-based projects in the UK. The final section of the report then goes through how we as a council can support the creation of local carbon credits and what is the role of the council. Now, in the carbon market, there's 3 different areas where the council could potentially intervene. At the supply side as a project developer, all the way at the demand side as a buyer of credits, and also filling a potential market facilitator role, bringing together both supply and demand. So the report goes through what each of those roles would involve and what work's already been done to date by the council and also by other local authorities in the country. And finally, to summarise, some key points to take away from the presentation: that first of all, the council recognises the value of local carbon credits as a mechanism to finance carbon reduction and removal, and it also is a key part of achieving our CNAP as evidenced by Pathway 5. The council also can play a range of roles to support the creation of local carbon credits, from project developer to market facilitator to buyer of credits. And the key focus of the council is on identifying opportunities for the council to develop local nature-based projects to generate a source of carbon credits and enhance the natural environment. And the aim at this stage, prior to LGR, is to identify project opportunities and also progress the development of business cases for viable sites so that we have those shovel-ready schemes to take forward to the new unitary council. And our approach is informed by best practice and agreed within our carbon offsetting policy. So that just briefly summarises and introduces the report that was shared with you. The question we have today, in addition to any questions that you may have, is how can we best engage with parish councils to explore potential opportunities in their areas? We're obviously at this early stage of scoping and identifying potential projects, and projects will exist within parish areas. So we want to hear from all of you if you have any suggestions about how best we can engage with parish councils on those opportunity areas.
Okay, thank you. And my thanks for a very councillor-friendly set of slides, if I may put it that way, that don't come too full of jargon and readily understandable. So thank you for that. I've got my own thoughts on whether parish councils are the best route to go down this, but let's hear from others what they want to chime in. Councillor Lee, go on.
Yeah, I think if I'm talking to my councils, they'll know about nature-based solutions, sequestration projects going on. They know what's going on in their backyard. So yeah, it's a bit back to our original comments on the other agenda item. They can inform if they're given some information about what needs to be passed, as that might be useful to then actually accredit it as a carbon credit. And then the mechanism needs to kick in to I guess, measure it. I thought.
So I've just spoilt my own peeing of praise to Alex, because I interpreted that in a rather different way in terms of how parishes might go about creating these opportunities. But I am entirely in agreement with you that we need to get them to put that information into us. Yeah. Councillor Power.
I'm glad you understood all these slides, Chairman, because the one on page 67 completely defeated me. I don't know whether high yield means it has high potential, or whether it means that it has little yield at the moment but has more potential, and I didn't understand which we should be prioritising as the one best to produce carbon credits.
Agreed.
So if we could have an explanation of that one, I'd be very grateful.
My brain was obviously being far too simplistic on that, and thinking that the green ones are the ones we should prioritise. But let's ask the expert.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you for picking that one up. It's not the most obvious of graphs, so obviously I'm happy to unpick this one in a bit more detail. This one is a graph that was produced by a consultant called Arcadian, who are obviously a Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, who looked at 12 of our sites. And what they were trying to do is understand the carbon flux from those sites. What that means essentially is how much carbon is it sequestering, so removing from the atmosphere, or in some cases is actually emitting into the atmosphere associated with that land use on the site. So this one takes 12 different sites ranging from Bramdean Common all the way up to like Winnall Moors. And you can see in green, that means that it's net sequestering carbon. So it's removing carbon from the atmosphere. It varies across the different sites. So some like Winnall Moors is sequestering 39.4, and that's tons of carbon. And Bramdean Common is 11.1 as an example. Out of all the sites, there's only one which is orange and positive, and that means it's a carbon emitting site. So as it's listed in triangle, it's an agricultural use, so it's producing emissions. The other sites are not, and they're net sequestering emissions. The amount of sequestration does differ across the different sites, and that's partly because of the land use, the type of land, and how much carbon that land does sequester. But also the state of the land can make a difference, how well it's managed. So that explains the difference between them. It is quite a hard job trying to calculate the carbon flux in sites. These ones were done based on essentially estimates of likely carbon sequestration from that different type of land use on each site. But you can do more detailed updates on carbon flux by actually having a flux probe and measuring it on site. That wasn't done for this particular study. So these ones will be based on some level of estimation of carbon flux on the site.
Okay, so I suppose that gives us a good idea of the relative rate of sequestration of those particular sites. How does the figure of 125 tonnes a year compare with comparable local authorities?
We haven't actually done the research looking into other local authorities yet, so that's a really good one for us to take away. It is a sizable amount. When you look at the total carbon emissions that are produced across the district in an annual basis, we're currently looking at about 600,000, 700,000 tonnes per year. So when we talk about 125 tonnes, it is a contribution towards that, and we should absolutely be looking to maximise it, but it's quite small in that regard. We do have quite a lot of land holdings. We look to manage these and improve the carbon sequestered from those land holdings. Other local authorities are doing similar work, but I think we're obviously leading in that way. But I don't have the figures to compare between them in terms of the amount of carbon that's sequestered in different areas. This again is only a snapshot of sites, and 125 tonnes is just across our land holdings. So other local authorities that may potentially have larger land holdings might sequester more carbon, and equally smaller land holdings less carbon. But we can see majority of the sites are in a favourable position. There's one which is an agricultural site here out of the 12 that were done in a deep dive, which is an agricultural site, and more potentially could be done to sequester more carbon in that area.
Thank you. So as you know, Chairman, I like to follow the money. Is there an implication here that if we encourage the farming practice on the Littleton Triangle to be changed in some way, that would financially advantage both the person managing that land and the council if we were able to sell the credits?
Back to incentivisation again.
I think when you're taking any parcel of land, you always need to make a decision as the landowner in terms of what you do with that land. In the case of a site that's been dedicated for agriculture, having it as agricultural use can obviously lead to income through agriculture. If the landowner wants to look at alternative uses of the site, there are potential income streams that come from exploring natural capital, like carbon markets, like BNG, like nutrient neutrality. So I think when it comes down to it, when you're weighing up whether it's an economic decision, whether it's an environmental decision, it's a balance between the two and a decision on the landowner about how best to take that site forward. In the case of Lytton Triangle, for example, if there's an agreement that we want to explore that site for more environmental gain, or maybe look at alternative use of the site, there are potential income streams that could be explored to, to make that a more attractive economic argument.
Do you want to come back with a supplementary?
I do. So I think we've got an answer there. So landowners are motivated by earning money from their sites. If you want to get parish councils excited about improving their environment, and most of them are actually quite keen on that, I can think of a few exceptions. These worked examples of how, by changing what is happening on a sector of land, can improve the environment and create money for the landowner, has to be the way to go. And that's worked examples, and actually following the money, it works.
Agree. Councillor Brick.
Actually, a similar question, building on what Councillor Powell was saying. I suppose what I'm trying to get my head around is how would you sell this to someone if you were engaging, say, with a parish? What is the relative value of land that is kind of used for carbon sequestration versus, say, agriculture versus housing? I mean, if you had an area which is under a lot of pressure from a housing developer, and you were trying to find alternative ways to incentivize them to put it to a use that would be more palatable to the local community, which I think a few of us will probably relate to. I mean, is this even a kind of an avenue, or is this kind of the relative value of these carbon credits infinitesimal compared to the value it could be from housing? I'm assuming it'd be the latter, but it'd be interesting if it was the former.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think with any of these schemes that we'd be looking to take forwards, we always would want to gear towards building a business case which demonstrate value for money in whatever schemes that we proceed with. When we're talking about a natural capital site, for example, we will be looking, I think we've clearly demonstrated there's a strategic case for this level of investment, but what a business case will need to demonstrate is it the right use of that land, and does it generate the benefits that are in line with what we want to achieve as a council, our strategic benefits, and also, yeah, the right thing economically for the site. We want to do further studies to identify opportunity areas, and then as part of that site scoping that we'll be doing is comparing what alternative uses of the site could be used. At that stage, if we've got a compelling case that, putting this natural capital is the right thing for that area and the business case stacks up, then by all means we'd invest in it. I think natural capital schemes like this, investing in things that have carbon credits that can be generated, they do generate income stream. And one of the things the business case will have to set out is that that does in fact generate a positive return and something that is comparable to alternative uses.
Councillor Horrell, did you want?
Chair, my question is sort of on similar lines. I can see parish councils being very attracted by some of this, but it's the sort of question of how much, what's involved, who's funding that, how are we managing that? And for many of them, obviously, we must remember they're very much a volunteer force elected in our key rural communities. And I think we'd need to almost craft up something as more of a working example for them to get their head around what that would mean. So I can think of one of mine that has a really great piece of land that might offer something, but I'm not sure they'd even know where to start in the conversation. So I might need more guidance from you about that overall sort of plan, viability, how that works, and where the responsibility lies as you go along that path if they did become one of their shovel ready projects. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I just thought I'd share with the committee. I came up with an idea where I have 5 wards, and for the price of a cup of coffee a week, with a precept increase, we could employ an ecologist who could be a knowledge, extra capacity doer, shared part-time role across the 5 parishes to get on and do some of this stuff. So I think if we were to be innovative, we could actually find ways to do this. It works easy for me because I've got 5 parishes that I work with. If you don't have that, you're obviously crossing ward boundaries, which could be more challenging. But just to illustrate, I worked it out, a cup of coffee a week, a precept increase an FTE for 3.5 days of the week and an ecologist, you could do it.
So they get the benefit of your wisdom, Danny, for free, don't they? But I think this on the serious point here goes back to two things. Firstly, what you were saying earlier, that we need to encourage the parishes to pass back the information on good things going on in their areas. But we also, as Councillor Horrell said, we need to give them the right encouragement and the right support to, if we're serious about getting them to do a lot of this themselves. Councillor Brophy.
There was a case in my ward in Badger Farm recently where there was the opportunity to buy lots of small pockets of land that were left by the developer from the developer, and the parish could take them on. And for the parish, that looked just like a liability. And I think in terms of getting, and to Councillor Hall's point about how you could make this, I mean, you've talked about making this shovel ready. You almost need to make a kind of a toolkit to make this kind of business case ready that they can plug into easily. If they knew that there was a way of monetizing some of those acquisitions and some of that land through carbon credits in a way that was simplified, that might have suddenly made that case easier. And I think in the end, it fell to Winchester City Council to acquire that land and carry on maintaining it, whereas we obviously would prefer the parish to do it. So we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot on both fronts by not being able to be ready to equip them to take those decisions. Yeah, so that's my observation on how they would have taken that.
I think we could all come up with examples similar to that, actually. Councillor Eagle.
Yeah, I wrote down my little note here and I said win, win, win. Again, it's this bundling, stacking sort of thinking. You know, nature-based solutions, sequestration tool, nature-based solution, flood mitigation prevention tool, nature-based solution, native and biodiversity or nature credit tool. And I just think if we're smart, we can do many things with these tools that we've been talking about. So it's about integration, in my view.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
In one of my 7 parishes, I have an ex-trustee of the Hampshire Isle Wildlife Trust, and we also have an extremely active farm cluster who are also riparian owners. And I think you need a pincer movement to get this moving locally by working with the farm clusters as well as the parish councils and the Wildlife Trust, because they have been working with landowners, know what works and what doesn't. And we already have the partnerships. I think it's a matter of utilising existing partnerships to make it work for everybody. Thank you.
That's a good point, bringing the clusters as well. I mean, across my 12 parishes, we have similar problems. I hope we've given you a reasonable answer to your exam question there. I think that there is a lot that parishes can contribute, and as people have said, nearly all parishes are keen to contribute on these things as well. So if you're very quick, go on.
I just want to mention South Downs National Park. So I had conversations with the strategic director there and mentioned the idea of getting the rangers more engaged with the parish councils and so on. So Hampshire's got I think running a project called Shoots Along the Routes, which is, you know, traffic calming and all the rest of it. So once again, it's just it's joining the slot up.
It is. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Have we given you enough to be going on with?
Yeah, plenty. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Running a short pause for everybody to flip their screens onto the next item, which I think will be equally interesting and possibly slightly more taxing. Public spaces protection orders. Councillor Cremoisen, good evening.
Good evening, Chair. Good to be back at HEP.
Can I invite you to do a brief introduction to your slide set?
Just bear with me a second. Also, I want to make sure I can actually read this with these glasses. Right. The genesis of this presentation came about last summer due to some challenges in several areas. Firstly, with sort of the management of commercial waste, but particularly waste from the various restaurants and cafes and so on, and the bin management in the town centre. And there were some challenges there which we have got on top of. And then also with the volume of litter and the management of the black bin bags of collected litter in the outer close. So while there were some tools available to the council to address that, their officers were talking about whether there would, it would be helpful to have other powers which might be available through PSPOs to help, create some enforcement of what we're trying to achieve there. So at that stage, it was very much firmly in my portfolio of recycling, waste and street cleaning. Now, subsequently, as we were working through that process of trying to use the existing tools and the relationships that the council has with tenants and so on, by tenants, I mean the commercial tenants, to try and manage it more effectively. Various ward members, particularly in the town, who also in some cases happen to be CAB members, were getting a substantial ear bending about antisocial behaviour of various types in the town area. Now, there's already a PSPO covering the consumption of alcohol in some areas, and which there's an update, a renewal of that particular PSPO going through at the moment, but that doesn't cover all the forms of ASB, antisocial behaviour, that were being raised as a concern. So officers offered that in some cases the PSPO powers could be expanded away, beyond just that, and to include the powers needed to better manage the commercial bins, but also some of those other antisocial behaviours by just by strengthening those PSPOs. So my colleague, CAB member, Councillor Becker, has the antisocial behaviour part in her portfolio. So this is where it kind of strays a bit off my particular patch, but I will, obviously take on board what we hear tonight, and we'll share that with Councillor Becker, the feedback and so on. I would like to just stress, and with Chair's agreement here, that if you could treat this as very early stage engagement to gather the evidence from informed members about the pros and cons of expanding those PSPO powers, rather than necessarily treating it as full-on scrutiny of a clear and definitive proposal. So with that, I think I will hand over to David, who will walk us through what PSPOs could be used for and how that sits with what we're currently using.
Just before you come in, David.
Just to add as well, the importance of where a district doesn't have a PSPO in place to cover the breadth of things that we may want to look. Part of the process is that it would need to go to a judge to be agreed, and therefore it's important, as part of our gathering evidence as to why we need it, it's important that we have this early stage thinking so we can evidence that we have engaged with a breadth of people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, members, officers and colleagues. Yep, my role this evening is to run you through what public space protection orders are, and to seek your input and steerage on a way forward in regards to PSPOs. So what is a public space protection order? I quote the legislation, Antisocial Behaviour Crime Policing Act 2014. So it's a piece of legislation that's been around for some time. So this is an opportunity to have a look at those powers and see how they might benefit Winchester's Street scene. They are designed to deal with specific, persistent and unreasonable nuisances in particular public areas. So it relates to a specifically defined geographical area that might be part of the Winchester district or the entirety of the district. And their purpose is to ensure that public spaces can be enjoyed freely from antisocial behaviour, so that the wider public can enjoy those spaces without that kind of behaviour right under their noses. They are timed, so they can only last for 3 years, and that was specifically built into the legislation, so they can't last in perpetuity, which means that after 3 years, unless they are reviewed, they will automatically cease to become effective. So if we wish to continue a public space protection order beyond the 3-year period, as has been cited by Councillor Camoyson on the existing PSPO, we have to review that, and that also requires consultation for that to be extended. As I say, they apply to a geographical area, so they apply to anyone in that designated area in respect of those identified behaviours. So if we had a PSPO for littering, and heaven forbid I should drop some litter, it applies to me as much as it does to anybody else that is in that geographical defined area. And there are penalties that can be applied. So if you are caught, for example, dropping litter, that is a criminal offence that can be issued with a fixed penalty notice, £100 fixed penalty notice, or if you were to refuse to pay and therefore go to court, it can be a fine of up to £1,000. Commonly restricting activities and behaviours of PSPOs around the country, as we've hitherto been mentioned: alcohol, use of alcohol and drugs. We currently have a PSPO for the consumption of, or the non-cessation of the consumption of alcohol when asked to do so by an authorised officer, and also to refuse or surrender that alcohol when asked to do so, or the psychoactive substances. And the current PSPO for that does come to an end in September this year, hence they're already in train to get that reviewed and extended. Dog control, the PSPO can be used for fouling or failing to carry dog waste bags, or not keeping dogs under control, specifically on leads in those areas. We currently use the Dogs Fouling of Land Act 1996, which covers the whole district. So we do have pre-existing powers for dog fouling. But as you might imagine, enforcement in that wider area is particularly challenging at the moment. Urination, defecation, this is all lovely stuff, isn't it? But yeah, we can use PSPOs to control that kind of behaviour. Spitting, or as maybe more relevant for Winchester, a bit of aggressive begging in there as well. Busking is an area that can be used for public space protection orders under sort of broader public nuisance elements. And busking actually is probably one of the areas where Winchester is a popular busking site up and down the high street. For those of you that walk up and down the high street on a regular basis, most days of the week there'll be at least one busker, particularly around the Buttercross area or the Covert. And we do get regular complaints from local businesses in regard to busking. And as previously mentioned, we've got littering and waste. Currently, there are powers under the Environment Protection Act which we can deploy to serve fixed penalty notices and also control commercial waste. But as was previously mentioned, the Public Space Protection Order will encompass, or potentially could encompass, all of these aspects in that geographical area as previously explained and defined. PSPOs, its aim is to simplify a range of different legislative regimes within that specific area. In order for us to adopt a PSPO, those controls need to be proportionate and reasonable and necessary to control those pre-identified behaviours. We are required, we can't just do this unilaterally, we are required to consult stakeholders and the public. So stakeholders in regards to enforcement could and would be the local police, community representatives, business community representatives, for example, the BID. In terms of busking, we would be looking to consult with the busking community, although they are notoriously difficult to engage with, but we would, notwithstanding, we would make efforts to engage with them, and also members of the public and residents in Winchester, Winchester's area. We have to put up signage to explain what the restrictions are once that's been adopted. And in terms of enforcement, and this is quite an important point to note, you know, the success of the PSPO does very much hinge upon the levels of enforcement that we would deploy. That enforcement would be through either authorised council officers, police officers, PCSOs and other, as it were, agents authorised by the council. And that's quite an important point because there is the potential to bring in an external enforcement authority where resources are limited. PSPOs need to be targeted. We cannot use them to target specific groups such as the homeless. So we have to be careful in the way that we conduct our consultation and identify those behaviours that we wish to control. So we can't target those specific and vulnerable groups. And also alternative tools should also be considered before a public space protection order is used. So pre-existing and bespoke legislation, which I've been through in short earlier. So for PSPOs in Winchester, the current position is that the number of fixed penalty notices that we serve at the moment is very low. And when I say low, I mean in single figures. So we don't have what I would describe as a proactive enforcement position on the service of fixed penalty notices currently. In addition to that, the current fixed penalty notice rates are quite low. So we would use the PSPO to have a fresh look at that to increase those penalties, because currently we believe that the fixed penalty regime at the moment is of limited deterrent. Our enforcement capability is also quite limited. So the numbers of officers that are, as it were, walking the streets is low, and obviously when it comes to enforcement, you have to be able to actually witness the behaviour taking place at the time in order to successfully take forward a prosecution. And in serving a fixed penalty notice, you need to be satisfied that you have sufficient evidence in order to take that particular case to court. Otherwise, you shouldn't be serving the notice. As previously mentioned, the PSPO for alcohol expires in September, but that's already in play in terms of its extension and renewal. The public space protection order can strengthen controls within the public regime of that geographical area as identified. And it very much aligns with our taking pride in Winchester approach. So we want to ensure that Winchester is a city which members of the public residents do take a pride in visiting and living in. So it all forms part of that wider insurance that we are maintaining that as a high quality environment. So there are opportunities that we can explore through the public space protection order regime. We can look at it in terms of, do we want it just to cover the Winchester town centre, or do we want it to cover broader areas of the district depending on demand and need? And we can have a fresh look at the kind of behaviours that we would like to seek to affect controls through a PSPO, as per previously shown, all those various different types of behaviours, busking controls, littering controls, etc. And we can use it as an opportunity to increase the fixed penalty notice levels so that there is a high level of deterrent sitting within the public space protection order regime. And we can look at enforcement models to ensure that there is a high level of visibility on our streets, should we wish to do so, which ties in with the point about considering external enforcement agency models on delivery. So in terms of PSPOs in Winchester, we are seeking HEP's input, steerage on the co-design, early co-design of any proposed PSPO that we would want to explore, to initiate a self-welcoming inclusive Winchester street scene. As part of that co-design, we need to shape those outcomes, we need to determine those principles, and we need to set out clearly how we are going to undertake our consultation. Obviously, we'll be working with our communications team to ensure that that's done in the correct manner, but we are looking for member input on how we also engage with, for example, our town forum and our ward councillors and parish councillors. We need to define the geography that we would like a public space protection order to encompass. City centre only. We can do it in pockets. We can have a city centre PSPO as well as a PSPO covering some of the market towns or a market town. Again, that would all form part of that consultation piece. and we're looking for member intelligence, if you will, to inform us where you would like us to concentrate our efforts. So you are very much seen as an active partner in shaping the outcomes of the PSPO. We are very keen to ensure that the PSPO isn't just a blunt stick. We would be using the PSPO as a canvas upon which to deliver an education programme on raising awareness amongst the public about suitable and civic behaviours. So it's not just out there serving tickets. And again, that would be a communication piece focusing on prevention rather than regulation. And we would be looking for, should we choose to adopt a PSPO, we would be looking to explore the use of an enforcement agency to assist us in delivering on the PSPO as well. And how you would like us to measure success. Is that in numbers of fixed penalty notices served purely? Is that more in a sort of nuanced way in terms of lower levels of litter, greater compliance amongst our businesses and our members of the public? So we really do need your viewpoint on, is it an empirical measure or is it more of a value-added measure to the street scene environment? So just really summing up, benefits, clean, safe and fairer street scene for our visitors, businesses and residents. Enforcement underpinned by that public education piece is key to the success of a public space protection order. We want to adopt a collaborative approach with our partners, so Business Improvement District and local police forces. So setting out the next steps. Really, these are the questions for you as a committee, just to get the ball rolling. What are the kind of activities and behaviours that you feel would be of merit to include within public space protection order controls? What are the areas, area and or areas that the PSPO should apply to, Winchester City, whole district, individual market towns in addition? And we also need to identify the challenges and solutions on delivery and enforcement. There is very little point in raising public expectation if we can't enforce it. And I will just very quickly wrap up. Benchmarking and research for success and failures. We will obviously, as part of the adoption, look at other local authority PSPOs, where they were successful, where they were less successful, and we will commence stakeholder consultation prior to obviously presenting our position to Cabinet for their detailed input and potential adoption of the PSPO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Can I ask a few questions first? Of course. Number of FPN served in Winchester is low. Can you expand on that, please? Give us some numbers and in over what period?
So for
roughly.
So in the wider Winchester district for dog fouling, which is one of the areas, so I've got 2 animal welfare officers working in my team. We have served 4 fixed penalty notices in the last 2 years for dog fouling. For littering, I don't think we have served any, maybe 1 or perhaps 2, but it's that low.
And for alcohol?
Having spoken, so again, that's not my, that's the neighbourhood wardens team that enforced that PSPO, and having spoken to them prior to the committee, they have informed me that they have served none. But the offence is not the consumption of alcohol; it is continuing to consume alcohol when asked to stop consuming alcohol by an authorised officer. So their interventions have been successful to the point where they've not needed to serve an FPN.
And do we have any data on the number of? Sorry, go away. Do we have any information on the number of cautions that have been issued or anything like that?
I don't personally, but I can find that information should you wish.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Sorry, Adrian, Julie, you was about something?
I was only going to raise the same point. We wouldn't necessarily have data from the police when they use those PSPO powers or FPM powers in our stead, because we don't cross-pollinate in that regard. But I think it's something Dave's indicating we could find out.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, this is one of the points I was going to bring up later on this subject, but on licensing, this came to us for renewal on the alcohol PSPO before, and what was concerning was that the police hadn't to that point collected any data. just trying to remember when this was, but this was maybe several years ago. And I did say to them, would it be possible to start collecting data? And there was an assurance that maybe they could look into it then. So if that hasn't happened then, there's a real risk that we'll never find that out. And I guess my point about this is that, I mean, obviously this is a Liberal Democrat run council, so civil liberties should be top of the list. What you're also asking us to do is to give a power to either police officers or our officers or third party agencies. And that power, so actually just the wording here is quite useful. A PSPO is itself a civil measure, but breaching a PSPO is a criminal offence. This can result in a criminal record. The case goes to court and leads to conviction. So one of my concerns when this came to licensing is, in effect, we are giving people the power to go up to perhaps the most vulnerable members of the community and then further criminalise them, pushing them further into a state of marginalisation. So it's not a light power to give to, you know, a police officer. And the police officers aren't recording how often they're using that power. And often it's because they're just empowered to have that conversation. So it's not necessarily appropriate for them to capture data. But obviously, if we have a third party agency, you know, that would be a real concern, how you limit that power. Because if they're, say, targeted and incentivized based on the amount of people whose collars they feel, that could increase the number of convictions and not necessarily reduce the actual effect or produce a better effect. We might create perverse incentives that will actually further marginalise some of the most at risk people in our city and our society. So again, I think it's a big ask to give those kind of powers.
Sorry, shall I go first?
I think just to come in at that point, what David has outlined is the options available to us, not necessarily that we are looking to externalise this to a third party agency, because there is always sometimes that association that it is a bailiff or a heavy-handed approach. What David's outlined is those options are available to us. It could be a solution if done in the right way, but it's not necessarily what we're saying at this point, if that makes sense. It's scoping what we could or couldn't do, and that's the point at the moment. I just wanted to pull that out.
Oh, thank you.
I guess to follow up on that, I guess concern would be that if we give you the power first and then you decide on the method afterwards, then the horse is already bolted.
Okay, I could come in there and say, I think, as I understand it, we've got to ask ourselves, what are the problems we're trying to solve in the first place? And given that the rate of ticketing, for want of a better term, is so low, are the problems real or perceived? I don't know. We've talked about busking. There are other ways of controlling busking than through a PSPO. So just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of licensed pitches that they have on the tube in London, for example. So it strikes me in our discussion, we need to work out what, if any, problems we're trying to solve. And as a second order issue, are we just trying to solve them in the city, or are we trying to solve them in the market towns, or even the wider district? And then we get onto real issues of enforcement. If you're talking about, you know, somebody controlling litter picking on Branding Common or whatever. Okay, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I'd be interested to understand how we might deal with one of the key problems we have on the high street, which is begging. And that fluctuates at different times of the year. It is not associated, some people might say that's associated with the particular group. It is not. People come here to beg quite clearly. For those of us who don't live in the city and come into the city, I hear many residents saying they don't come in at certain times because they find that intimidating. They find it rather unpleasant experience that they're approached. And I'm questioning how I do identify that as a problem for this city. And I'm questioning how we might solve that. Is that a PSPO, or is there other actions that we might take to try and improve that? But I can certainly say to you that externally, people do not come here because of that at certain times. They find it very intimidating. And I'm not sure we're dealing with that on our current structures, which is why maybe this is the time to ask how we might deal with that.
Okay, well, let's take that head on as a specific then, begging. Presumably PSP
I'll
can't be used,
start,
or
yeah.
what other measures do we have?
I can give some examples of how, so a PSPO has values that sits behind it. So the values, and I use an example now of working in multiple authorities that use these, and those authorities had different values attached to it. So they felt very different in one authority to another based on the values of that authority. So in principle, if I talk through what that could look like, the first of all is words of advice, i.e. move on, or X is going to happen. So it's not, we don't find ourselves on the front page of the Daily Mail for slapping a fine on somebody without inappropriately, for example. So stage one would be words of advice. We all know that you'll have repeated offenders who will move from one spot to other. And the agents or the operatives or officers, whoever it may be, will know those people. And then that's where it's you've had words of advice and now it moves to fine. What we tended to see, and I'll use an example from London boroughs, is that those beggars would move to authorities that didn't have controls in place. And the PSPO is something that is, it's quite a simple process to issue the penalty notice to the individual. It's also quite simple for them to pay said penalty notice if they wish. Now, for that community, it's quite challenging, I guess, sometimes to track down the proof of address and so forth. And that's where the relationships and the links with the bid rangers or the PSPOs, the PCSOs, there's too many acronyms, isn't there? The PCSOs in the town centre are key, because that would then up a stage to, we've had this individual here, they've had words of advice, they've had a ticket. Now what other offences are in play? And that does tend to flush it through, shall we say, but it's a simpler route of dealing with some of these things. That there could be other powers available, but sometimes they're quite long and convoluted processes. This is a swifter way of dealing with it, but it's also quite uniformed that some of the, as you say, some beggars will travel to locations based sometimes on the demographics that are in that location, because they know what it will sometimes unlock, shall we say. So that's just given a live example of how it could be used, as it were. But the whole thing is really key. It's the values attached to the PCSO that we wish to use as a district council is key.
Thank you for that. Can I just explore some of that further then? Because as I understand it, and please tell me if I've got this wrong, begging on the street is an offence in itself. Yeah. So a PCSO can.
I don't think begging is an offence in of itself.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, but it's certainly not something that comes under my broad remit of legislation. But I think I would have. Yeah, I can check that out, but I'm pretty confident it's not an offence in of itself.
Okay. Well, every day's a school day. Okay, so we're saying, as an example, and Councillor Horrell's brought that specific one up, that is something where we would need a PSPO to be in place to enable us to have that. That would be our only tool in the toolbox to deal with that problem. This is what we're saying.
And begging is a quite generic term. So you have, for me personally, in my experience, more of an issue is charities or these individuals that come in and they're seeking for you to sign up for. Well, we under the licensing team, we control charitable collections of money, and that is physical money. So people that are asking you to put a pound in or what have you into their pot. So they have to pre-register with us as an authority. If they don't, that we can take them to task on that. And then there's behind that, they have to report how much they've collected and legitimise that charitable collection. Where you have individuals that are working for a charity and asking you to sign up for a direct debit, that's not covered. So they come in with very little control, and Winchester High Street, being a linear high street, is seen as an easy target for those kind of operations.
Councillor Westwood, please.
A simple search, it tells you that there is still an act that currently allows the arrest of anyone begging in a public place. It's still on statute books, but slated for removal. My point, I don't want to go down that path. I agree with what you were saying, in that you're asking us to advise on PSPO. I would like to come from a completely opposite direction and understand what issues you're seeing and what outcomes you'd like to achieve. Then we can relate it to some advice. So I'm unwilling to go down the path you're asking. I'd like to go from completely the other direction.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Just with regards to the alcohol PSPO, I was actually quite happy to approve that, because beforehand I asked the question of how often we use this, what are the issues, are we going to criminalise vulnerable people? And actually one of the things that assured me was that actually this does give the police the powers, a lighter power, to be able to tap someone on the shoulder and say, could you please not, could you please move on, before having to intervene in a more serious way. So actually it avoids that. The concern I had, I think, in that case, and I sort of said, well, as a lookout for the future, is that you provide some sort of data gathering on how those powers are used. So we have the guide rails and the assurance, and the fact that there was nothing satisfactory in place from the police. So the agencies enforcing that probably need to have some sort of way of recording when they are intervening using those powers, as opposed to using it as an informal way, because otherwise someone will be asked, a committee like this will be asked in 3 years' time to renew it again, and we'll say, well, what's the evidence base? And we'll say, we have no data. In which case we are handing a blank check with the powers, with the concerns I mentioned, but without any data against it.
Absolutely, and one of the criteria, one of the requirements to evidence the need for a PSPO is there needs to be sufficient data to back it up. So you can't, the guardrails are there to prevent the arbitrary adoption of a PSPO without justification. So we do need to, I mean, as Councillor Cremorson said, this is an early, heads up that we're looking at this in terms of its adoption, but I can assure you that we would not be adopting a PSPO. So for example, let's use busking. There's been a lot of discussion and debate already about busking, whether we go for a hard stop. Nobody's interested in a hard stop. We believe, and we have some evidence from the businesses, that actually they quite enjoy the vibrancy that busking brings to Winchester town centre. It predicates on the level and volume of the busking. So a lot of buskers now will bring in small amplification equipment, and you can hear, because of the acoustic profile of the high street being a linear high street with high-sided buildings, it travels a long way either way, up and down the high street, and affects many people, and especially outside the business that they will be busking. It's intolerable. So it's not the busking in of itself per se that's the issue, it's the level and antisocial volume that some of the buskers do choose to adopt. So there are levels of control that we can build into our PSPO, so that we're not, as you would not wish, to be overzealous and unreasonable.
Equally, there's ways of managing that without a PSPO. So let's be very clear on that. You don't need that to manage busking or volumes.
Yeah, I mean, currently we don't have a PSPO. The environmental health team regularly go out onto the high street and engage with buskers and ask them to either turn the music down and or move on. We have a buskers code that we cite to the buskers. I mean, there is a busking community that tends to come to Winchester a lot, and then there are the call them the blow-ins, if you like, that come in and you never see them again. The established busking community knows the rules. However, some of them do stretch them.
I think that goes back to what Councillor Pepperroth and myself are asking, which is this to be evidence-based.
Councillor Lee.
I just want to clarify something you said, David. Did you say that the dog fouling PSPO was in place and district-wide? Did I understand that correctly?
No, there's no public space protection order for dog fouling in the district at the moment. We currently rely on an older piece of legislation called the Dogs Fouling of Land Act, which also allows us to apply fixed penalty notices where we either witness fouling and or are provided with robust evidence from a witness.
So that's quite useful. I mean, from a rural perspective, there isn't a great deal here, I think, for my ward, but I can see a PCSO perhaps finding that quite useful to know that, and then presumably he or she could use that legislation to deal with a persistent problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, we would have to empower that individual to take that action. Currently, it's authorised officers of the council. So,
am I right in saying a few years ago, the law was changed so that others, such as parish clerk, for example, could be empowered to deliver a fixed penalty notice or something like that for dog fouling in a designated area? And I know in my own parish, we looked at this when it came out, as I say, it was at least 2 or 3 years ago now, and nobody in the room wanted to entertain the idea of being given that power, because it was just so alien to, well, any community, I suspect, not just the rural community.
Yeah, I mean, under public space under the PSPO provisions, we can empower authorised persons to undertake that action on our behalf, and certainly parish councils have been, I believe, I don't think there's any, I don't know if there's any in Hampshire, but up the country, up and down the country, certain parishes have taken on those powers. However, it is, yeah, it's not everybody's desire to confront dog owners that have allowed their dogs to foul, and yeah, there's an influence, and you have to witness it firsthand. You can't. That's the challenge. It's one of the reasons why the FPNs are so low, because officers will patrol certain, call them hotspot areas, and even when they're hotspots, it's still very difficult to witness that incident taking place firsthand. But it does happen.
Councillor Horan.
Chair, I wonder, I hear the concern about expanding PSPOs, but I wonder whether one of our issues is that our sort of visible enforcement is relatively limited. We have the partnership with the bid rangers, which is excellent. We have limited officers who perhaps get called out to the street, but actually if you're walking the street and you come here with an expectation, you find a crowd drinking on a bench, you have somebody begging, somebody's dog has fouled the street. They're just not pleasant experiences, and people are feeding back that actually it isn't that great to come here at certain times. So I just wonder whether it's more, part of this is not about whether we've got the right PSO in place, but it's about whether we've just got the right presence on the street. I know on the housing side, we're always talking about, making sure that we get those who are rough sleeping in and make sure they're triaged and sorted. So have we got the right resources, human resources, to just have a presence to give that reassurance to residents and visitors about the city and how we conduct business, rather than just necessarily thinking about we must have this piece of legislation in place. Now that's challenging, probably, with the resources. Cheryl's smiling at me, but maybe that is something that we could think about within this context of this discussion. Thank you.
I just would be interested to hear from others around the table, excuse me, whether we share that, apocalyptic is far too strong a word, but that more dystopian view of the city that you've just sort of conjured up there. I mean, do we really have a lot of experience of individuals saying they wouldn't come to Winchester because of the drinking on the streets, the begging, the busking, and I don't know. Please.
I think the areas of behaviour that relate to commercial bins and so on, I actually feel quite comfortable with the idea of having stronger powers to better manage that, and because I think it is, the expectations are quite clear. The places where the bins should be and the way in which those things should be managed are quite clear. And if we have persistent sort of misuse of those areas and not following the rules by commercial businesses, I'm quite comfortable with actually saying, okay, well, we do have powers and we could deploy them. And that, of course, is the bit that's in my portfolio. The bit that I am not so comfortable about is the ASB stuff, because that's in someone else's portfolio and I'm not quite sure what's working, what isn't working. But I'm sympathetic to the viewpoint that Councillor Brophy expressed around the risk involved if you have powers. I'm very sympathetic to Councillor Westwood's view of, okay, where's the evidence? And I'm also sympathetic to Councillor Horrell's point of view expressed, because I think there have been occasions when I've walked through, and I don't live in the city, I live just outside, and I've walked through and I've seen what I think I would describe as aggressive begging and presence on the high street that is going a little bit beyond just in the corner. And on a bad day, and it is only literally very, very occasionally on a bad day, and that can leave a bad, if you like, feeling for people who've just come in. If they're not in all the time like I am, they might take away an impression that is pretty poor, and it would be great to be able to manage that. But I can see there's tension there. I'm also of a view that there is a chicken and egg thing where the evidence is concerned. We are, I think, struggling to get structured evidence, which is, as with my background, very much get the structured evidence to support it. But until you have the powers, it seems difficult to be able to get that in a structured way. So there's, I'm comfortable to go with this, because I think we kind of almost need to have some powers to be able to gather the data to be able to get the evidence to be able to say, yeah, actually we do have a problem here or not. So I don't know if that helps. I've sort of I'm here as a CAB member. I'm here also as just a member of the public. I'm here as a member, a councillor, also who's witnessed some of those things, and I can kind of sense there's a struggle here between some pieces of evidence that support it, and equally some very strong, well-articulated concerns about the risks if you do have it. So I'm going to just shut up now for a moment and just listen.
No, useful. Thank you. Sean, come on first.
If I may, Chair, I appreciate it. It's always difficult, isn't it, when you're asked for advice without the data behind the advice at times, isn't it? And I think in local government, we're very good at that, aren't we? In terms of I'll provide advice. Where's my report? Where's my data? How do I interrogate that and provide the advice? One of the key parts in crafting the PSPO, which we're looking to do to have additional tools in the box to manage some of this, what could be perceived as quite low level things, is that one of the key parts will be asking members of the public in terms of if we take a piece of geography in our district. So if, for example, we took a piece of geography and we said, this is the red line that we'd like to look at. So this is the boundary that we'd like to look at. And what's important to you for that? So is it begging? Is it busking loudly or inappropriately? Or, for example, we hear from the bid quite frequently. So while some retailers like the busking, other retailers, it blocks their shop frontage. And when it's the same I won't comment on anyone's performance standard, but when it's the same all day, actually it's detracting from the shop. So part of this will be about asking members of the public what's important to them, asking businesses what's important to them, if it's in the town centre, for example, if it's in the market towns, but then also trying to get to a point where I guess we've got a model or a format that, if it's appropriate and a parish had a particular issue with, I mean, my village is terrible for, you know, it's all the WhatsApp group's always going with dog fouling, for example. But it's always going. But actually, you know, it means different things to different people, and this is not about a one size fits all across the district. That is not what we're saying. We're saying where we've got pockets of challenges, and some of that intelligence comes from the bid, for example, because we work with the bid, so some of that intelligence comes from the bid, or some of it's anecdotal challenges that we have at officers around some of, as Councillor said, waste presentation and so forth. This is I guess a simpler way or an additional tool in the toolbox to manage some of that. It's not about wanting to become a nanny state and slapping fines everywhere. It's a simpler tool that we can then, as a couple of councillors has described, use as a structure and a scaffold to look at how we enforce, because no legislation is going to work unless we have the reinforcement that sits underneath it, and this is that structure that does it a lot easier. Could we, you know, David's team that would go out, actually some of that legislation is quite it's quite meaty, isn't it, in terms of what the consequence is. This is a simpler way of dealing with that. So yeah, I guess we're not asking for HEP's decision or to give us any power at this point. We're just trying to canvass the mood of what would be important to members and what we hit. You know, that's what we're looking for.
I would say in response to that I think the mood so far is largely that we would prefer to look at what alternatives there might be to address some of these problems, notwithstanding the fact that this is but one tool in a kit. Let's have a look at some of the others before we give any firm advice one way or the other. But Councillor Power, you want to come in?
I'm quite in favour of having one of these orders for the centre of Winchester. Actually, I think it is a useful tool, and I am reassured that the bid rangers are actually authorised to impose this, because that answers my next question, which is about the resources to enforce and the cost of enforcement. Now, we don't seem to have many community safety officers making a difference in this area. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, as you say, they're just not being recorded very widely. But if the parishes see that council resources are being spent more in Winchester on enforcement, they are going to say, why can't I have some of that in my parish or in my market town? And the answer to that might be, would the market town like to pay for some enforcement? Now, I don't perceive that in Alresford we have a problem. Dog fouling is another matter. We won't go there. But I don't think my town council would be minded to fund some level of enforcement, because at the moment we don't perceive that we have a problem. And it comes back to that perception, the public perception, and who is going to pay for enforcement? And I'm sorry, that's what it comes down to, because we do not have money lying around that can be applied to this. Thank you.
I just pick up on two things there. Firstly, talk about community safety officers. I know in Councillor Lee's parishes and some of mine, in fact, the same individuals do it. We do have community safety officers, and they have a very beneficial effect, I think would be fair to say. So there is a model that's out there that's working, and those parishes do throw money into the pot to fund them. So that's one thing. The second thing I just wanted to get clear is, as I understand it, and again, please tell me, David or Trevor, if I've got this wrong, we're not talking about a single PSPO here. We're talking about a number of PSPOs that would focus on particular issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the ideal model of approach would be to have a PSPO that relates to a specific behaviour, and then another PSPO that relates to another behaviour, and that's really to make it a lot easier and from an enforcement perspective. Because if you load too much into a single PSPO, it gets complicated from a legal standpoint. But yeah, but that's really I think that's probably the two salient questions for me is what is the what behaviours do you think we should sort of ask in terms of what the controls are, as Cheryl says, and what geographical area should they apply to?
Councillor Westwood come back and then Councillor Horrell.
Thank you. Right, just picking up on 3 points here. Firstly, resources. I absolutely agree with what you said about resources, and you know, resources are important. There's clearly a need for more consistent views and not enforcement, but visibility on the streets in the city. Absolutely, there is there. So there is a resource, there is a money angle to this. Dystopian view of the city. Well, I kind of agree with you, actually. It's not dystopian because there is a perception that there are problems in the city. I pick that up from my residents as well. I see it myself now and again. It is not a dangerous city. It's a great place, but there is definitely at certain times a perception that it's not quite safe enough for certain groups of our society. So that perception is there. And the reality is that takes place now and again, to the point where one of our councillors from one of these meetings going in that direction down to Abbey Gardens area felt exceedingly unsafe one evening, to the point where we're concerned for her because of groups of people in the town. So there's definitely a problem. It's not a massive problem, but I'll say again, this is a great place. But there's definitely something there that we should be addressing, and that comes back to my resource and having it at the right time of day. The third point is the tools. I come back and press back again. PSPO is a tool, but there are other tools. So I don't want to just say PSPO is the tool we will use and have a whole raft of PSPOs. I think we should understand what it is we want, what the outcomes we require, and what is the best tool to have. If it is a PSPO, then it's a PSPO. But I do believe there's other tools available. We should assess them.
Chair, I just, I think Councillor Westwood and I are in a sort of similar place. I want to be able to walk down the high street and be able to say to residents who come into the city from my part of the district that they could walk down, they won't feel unnerved because somebody's asking for money and begging. They won't be pounced upon by the person who wants them to sign up for a charitable donation on a regular basis. And they won't have to walk around that group over there who are all crowded round with bottles and cans. And that's in broad daylight. That's not, you know, at the sort of twilight hours. And it is something that exists in this city. And I just want to put on record that a lot of us who are in and out of the city, you know, on a regular basis, feel that. Now, I think we have a duty just to recognise that and understand how we might find some solutions. And it's been a good discussion to explore that further. But it is real, and I just wanted to put that on record that that's what people are saying to us in the wards that we represent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's useful. Councillor Brophy.
I'll caveat what I'm going to say by saying I do agree it is a real issue, but one of the conditions of imposing a PSPO is proportionality, and obviously at the same time you have to have a proportional view of the actual challenges that you face. So you have perceived safety and perceived danger and actual danger and risk. We are not a good reflection of the world, in as much as the people, we're councillors, and the people who talk to councillors might be the kind of people who talk to councillors, but they might not be the same kind of people who'd say regularly go to, I don't know, match days at Southampton. So I've seen you at St Mary's, Caroline. We know that the experience of walking through any busy city can feel very, very different and very, very scary. And at the same time, you know, that is the nature of a city as it grows. So we will have growing pains in the city as we scale up as a city, and that is happening. And I think part of this discussion is an important one to have, because it's how much do we actually wrap our communities in cotton wool, or how much do we allow them to kind of, you know, grow with the changing trends of a larger community. We should be aware of those risks, but we shouldn't necessarily overreact to those risks. Again, I stress proportionality is the key.
Thank you, everybody. I think we can start to wrap this up now by saying that I think we have broad agreement across this, actually, that there are perceived and real issues that need to be addressed. We're not convinced that all of them need to be addressed by PSPOs, and we would like some further thought given to other means of controlling, say, busking, for example, before signing up as a committee wholesale to the idea of that we want a range of PSPOs. I don't think that's what we haven't reached that point this evening. Is that a fair summation of what we said?
I'll just add one point to your summing up, which is the resources point. So David, you mentioned right at the beginning, there's no point in having the tools in place that you can't use because you don't have the resources to use the tools. So I think resources is a real issue as well, and that should be part of our.
No, thank you. Yes, certainly that should be part of the mix as well. Yeah. But I think really useful discussion we've just had. And I hope that gives you something to go on. Not perhaps as much as you were hoping to get, but I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wasn't expecting at any point to walk out of this room having a short list or a long list of specific targets and expectations. That wasn't the purpose of the presentation. But it's been very interesting listening to the debate and the issues and concerns, and you know, getting a flavour of member opinion on it.
Yeah, I think if you can go away from here with a flavour of that discussion, that would be that was good. Yeah,
Chairman, if I, you know, one of the things I think what we didn't draw out here is, in order to get the evidence, and we've heard from you and your experiences, and I know I've had my experiences, etc. But I do think there's some merit in going out to public consultation with maybe with the parishes and others, so as we can evidence what that perceived or actual feeling is. I think it goes back to perhaps Councillor Brophy's point about, you know, what is a town centre, you know, what it's, you know, when if you live out in the sticks, you know, do you know, when you come to the town, do you feel a bit more vulnerable? I don't know, you know, there's something around that. But until we go out and engage with the public and get some of that evidence, whether that's anecdotal, real, I'm not sure how we could then move this sort of conversation on a little bit. So I would want to explore what we wanted to do with you today was sort of hear everything you've said, and that's been really useful. But I think our next steps must be to sort of go out and do some engagement to find out how that sort of sits with the wider public as well. Maybe that's something Councillor Crimoyson would like to pick up on, because I think that's really, I wouldn't want to go away from here and think, well, what do we do? Do we come back to you with another paper? I think that there's got to be some more evidence gathering in the meantime, hasn't there?
I think there are a couple of things. First of all, look at the range of other tools that can go into this toolkit. That's one. Secondly, yes, I entirely agree. It would be entirely right to go out to parishes and indeed the town forum and so on. Now, how you get beyond that to get a broader spectrum of views, I don't know, but we've got a comms department presumably who would have better views on how to do that. So I'm all in favour of getting that,
and we'd
that
be
feedback.
happy to put a programme, you know, that was our intention for our kind of, you know, not necessarily next steps, but very much leaning forward in terms of how do we reach out,
see it all as part of the evidence gathering,
and then we can take in, you know, that what you said, and then come back with something a little bit more, let's say, polished, because, you know, this was that early co-design, it's that early thinking, but very much around, you know, having a range of views, you know, including yours in sort of supporting policy formation.
Yeah, no, happy with that.
Chair, if I could just add coming at the end there. I mean, you summed up very well, and can't really add to that. I think what I've heard this evening has been very much the conversations that have been going on in my own mind, which kind of perhaps portrays a very odd picture of what my mind must look like, because I can agree with pretty well everyone in the room, and those tensions are quite real in my mind as to how to move this forward. And I think Julie has also suggested at the end there that perhaps there's something we can do in engagement to gather together a more definitive idea of what the actual real problems are, and try and put some quantification to it to go alongside the anecdotal stuff that we all hear about, and maybe evidence which parts of those behaviours are the things which perhaps we need to focus on most initially, and maybe take a baby step into it. In one behaviour that might lead to getting more evidence about other behaviours later on. But I think there's plenty to think about, and I really thank the committee here for sharing your views so frankly. Thank you.
Good. No, thank you very much, Brad. That was a useful discussion. Right, we move on to the fourth item this evening, for which Campbell has been waiting patiently at the back of the room there for a long time. Recycling, looking to the future. So yes, please, let's look to the future. Who's going to start off? Is it going to be you, Steve?
I'll do a quick introduction. So our new food waste service has been rolled out to most parts of the district, and the remaining homes will have their service started by the end of March. We have some communication plans in place to try and drive up the participation rate for food waste, and alongside that also hopefully try and nudge people into better compliance with the other parts of recycling. But we're now turning to the future to prepare our area for changes and opportunities that are coming our way, and of course to take the initiative as a council to embed best practices for our whole district, which we hope will become a template for and a standard for the whole of the new unitary council that will emerge from the local government reorganisation. So we'd like to think we're not sitting on our laurels, admiring the good outcomes we have in place already, but we're aspiring to meet the aspirations of many of our residents in Winchester to recycle more and waste less, and hopefully do it in a way where we kind of embed it as part of the culture of the area known as Winchester District, that might well be part of something bigger in the not too distant future. So I'll hand over to Campbell to take us through that.
Thank you, Councillor Carmisen. I've got a small number of slides, but I really want to ask you some questions at the end to get your input into this, if this is all right. I think I've been to a number of presentations about this, and there is a lot going on now, and there's a lot more to happen. I won't go through each of these, but you'll be aware we're now rolling out food waste. I had my first food waste collection yesterday. I was very excited. And we're doing a recycling survey, and we've got just under 3,000 responses to that at the moment. And all these things which are happening are leading on to some more things which are happening. Councillor Carmisen's mentioned the unitary authority coming. We're a waste collection authority. We don't have a responsibility for disposal costs. The emissions trading scheme is coming very quickly with some significant amounts of money attached to that. So in the long term, which is 3 or 4 years away, there'll be a bill if we don't do this well. I think where we are at the moment, we're on about 40% recycling rate at the moment. We could get that up to about 50% if we do food well. We're then likely to introduce pots, tubs, trays and cartons linked to the new Hampshire County Council material recycling facility. That can get us up to about 60%. And then that then starts to be around the levels that the top people in the southeast are doing. And what makes the difference between having the right infrastructure and having the right levels of performance that we want is how well we do this, and how well we engage our communities, how well we engage businesses, and how well we manage behaviour change, so that we get lots of people involved rather than the people who are interested. And so what we want to really get your advice on is how we start to prepare the communities of Winchester for the changes which are coming up, and really getting members' views on 3 questions. And the questions are about how we start to tailor behaviour change to people, about how we start engaging people and how we start engaging businesses as well. So I think you've seen the slides. I don't really want to talk them too much. I really want to get your input into this, and start off with getting your views as members about how we might start to tailor behaviour change campaigns to them. We want them to recycle, and we want them to recycle more, and we want them to actually minimise how much waste produced in the first place. So that's the first question for you, really, to look at how we might do that and how we might start to engage people.
Thank you, Campbell. I just anecdotally from my area, I know on the interesting you say on the food recycling we can get up to 50%. We had our grey caddies back in December, I think early December, and initially there was a lot of pushback locally. People really didn't want them, and now what are we, eight weeks in, something like that, quite the reverse. And people are even, we're sad out in our way. People are sharing stories about how much they're using their grey bins now, which 8 weeks ago people were saying, no, if you want a spare, have mine. So I think that's quite good. It's more a case of if you give people the opportunities to do these things, they will, if you bring it, they will come, or whatever the phrase was in the day. I think that probably is a view common around the place. Councillor Horrell, I think, wants to come in first.
Well, I was one of the things that is high on the village social media feed is bags, no bags. That whole debate, some people love the bags, some people hate them. Why are we doing that? Why? I think the waste has to be emptied out of them. It's not processed with the bag. So that is an interesting one, because the caddies can be just washed out. So I don't know whether educationally that will just, people will get used to it, but bags or no bags is a topic of debate, and stopping some people from perhaps doing as much as they should.
I was going to say, we're really going down a rabbit hole now, but I have to say the quality of the bags that people have had to get as sort of refills for their freebie ones, there are quite a lot of stories of people leaving trails across their kitchen floors, and I think you would sign up to that. The ones you get commercially seem to be stronger, I have to say. But
yeah, so I think, and this whilst it is going down a bit of a rabbit hole, I mean, this is exactly, we've introduced some infrastructure, and what we want to do is engage with people about how to use it, to tell them how to use it. And if you look on our website, for example, there's a really engaging little video that talks about where the food waste goes and how much energy it saves and where the bags get taken out. And that's been viewed 2,500 times, which is great. But there's 120,000 people in Winchester. So how do we really start to make sure that those messages are getting out to people? And what we've done previously is when we did the reroute a while ago, it was really helpful to get the parish councils involved in telling people about these things. So if you pick up things which are not happening or queries, you can let us know, and we can start to target those messages to people about where bags goes and how they get used. Because what we are seeing, you're absolutely right, Chair. What we're seeing in the data is the tonnages are slowly creeping up, and the participation rate in food waste is slowly creeping up, which is really positive. So yeah, I think the more we get feedback about what works and what doesn't work, the more we can do something about it. Because we've got methods of communication, we've got answers to these questions, and it's really encouraging from my point of view, not just to see my bin being collected, but they're now on 6 phases, and we're collecting just over 50 tonnes of food waste a week in Winchester.
Councillor Horrell, for your social media threads, though, bags, please. They do help our crews significantly. So there is from a perspective of our crews collecting bags, please.
You could make it quite amusing and get people engaged. The comms team could have real fun with this.
okay, we've got Councillor Bennett, Councillor Brophy, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think from my personal experience, people see recycling as complicated. Now, I was really fortunate where I used to live in London, in that you could recycle almost anything. And initially, it all went in one bin. So, you know, paper, cardboard, tin, glass, plastic, bottles, it all went in one bin. They did change that because it's obviously then becomes a problem sorting it out later on. But the effect of that is that actually almost everything went in the recycling bin, and the black bin was for the exceptions. Whereas I think most people have the opposite mindset. They're trying to pick out what can be recycled from their general waste. So I think ultimately, if we want to increase recycling rates, we need to change people's perceptions in that it's recycling first, and it's the leftovers that go in the black bin. I'm not sure it's quite how we do that, and I think until we've got wider recycling of plastics, it's going to be quite hard because people don't know what the difference is between a plastic bottle and a plastic tray. It looks the same. Why can't I recycle one and not the other? And that's the biggest. For me, I think that's the biggest challenge, is that it's complicated or perceived to be.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy.
Just regarding communications, we talk about our comms team having a field day, and I think our comms team are fantastic. But I think one of the things that maybe as councillors, what we can do is amplify via things like parish newsletters. But actually, one of the frustrations I always have is I'm always nagging, our Lib Dem group and our cabinet members to tell us the messages they want pushed out on those monthly newsletters we have to do. And these important messages aren't really getting through. So the comms team needs to pass the documents to you, to pass to us, so we can amplify and signal boost it, because there are more channels that we're leaving unutilised. So yeah, my usual moan, but on record now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So some anecdotes. The bag issue has come up in my domain. The other one is, and we talked about this before, and that is tea bags with plastic. This is going into digestate, and we're spreading plastic onto the land. So they're not putting into tea bags, because I think most people still have tea bags with plastic. I don't. Another anecdote, I'll put it in my compost bin, despite my conversations about methane and all that. Towns more powerful than CO2. Just water off a duck's back. You're wasting your time talking like that. But then they throw the chicken bones out for the foxes and the badgers. And this is wrong. But this is what some of the stories I hear. And the other question I've been asked is, how do you calculate the amount of CO2 avoided? They want to know how you work that out. It's interesting. I've been asked that several times. So there is some interest, and there's obviously some different behaviours. And I'm in a rural area, so people are going to put it in their compost bin because they want to put, have green manure for their veg patches. So that may be, and I'd be interested to know what the rural urban breakdown is in terms of figures. That might be quite revealing.
I have to say, and Councillor Lee will have seen this, and the Bridge magazine, the headline that came from came from that video, I think, about generating enough electricity to charge your mobile phone from one banana skin or something like that. And the editor of our local village mag picked that out as the headline to put on there. So, I go along with all of this about messaging.
So, I think it's really helpful. I think, yeah, certainly the more ways we can get the messages out, the better, and the more questions we can get fed back. Because I think what we do have is we do have answers for most of these. So and things like what we're not is, I can't tell you exactly how we've worked out the CO2 for that banana skin, because what we've done is we've taken the data from people who are really good at this and have measured it, and we've got their references and we've looked at it and checked that's right. And we're using these data to really promote the way of doing it. So I think the more questions you can let us know, which are the ones that you're coming across, because you're the eyes and ears on the ground, we can then pass these back, and very happy to. I mean, the other bit we're doing at the moment is, as I said, we've done a questionnaire, and we've got 2,800 people, I think, so far have responded to that. That's still open. It's still on the City Council's website, and we'd love to get as many people as that responding to that, because that's telling us things about how full people's black bins are, which comes back to Councillor Bennett's point about making sure that that's the last option rather than the first option. So the more we can spread that around, the better, to be honest. And I think that almost, I'm not going to close that bit down, but that sort of takes us on to the next question in a sense, which is about how we really start to build engagement with people. So we get some of those behaviour change things done, but how do we really build on that, on those behaviour change campaigns to engage with people? Because there is so much is going to happen in the next couple of years with the impact you'll see from extended producer responsibility, with the start of the deposit return scheme, with the introduction of recycling of pots, tubs and trays. How do we really start to build engagement?
Before we move on, Councillor Horrell wants to come back in.
Chair, thank you. I was just, I mean, I sort of agree with Councillor Bennett that in our area, we're still quite complicated to do some of this because we can't do pots, tubs and trays. And if you come from other areas, you just think that's normal. Why can't we? Now, obviously, we'll catch up because the disposal piece will rectify itself. But so that will be easy. But I think as people get the gist of this, I had a conversation the other day about, oh, I've got lots of printer cartridges, you know, where are they going? Will we take them? No, we won't. So I like doing my bag of batteries and my bag of on the bin, those sort of things. But some things you have to write, okay, what am I going to do with those? And then if you're not careful, the last result is you put it in the black bin. The other thing that I don't know whether this is just we're a boozy lot. A lot of people have felt that the bottle accessibility when we went to curbside bottle collection, which was great, fantastic, but we pulled back on some of the other sites, and I know a lot of places you can't take bottles anymore that used to have them, and I as I say, maybe I live in a ward where we're quite boozy, but a lot of people find that quite frustrating that we can't recycle bottles as easily as we would like, and our bins of shame are already filled. So we have to find alternatives.
Just, I mean, on that, I mean, one of the really good things which is coming forward, and the county council, I think, are now in the final stages of tendering for people to start working on their new material recycling facility, and the intention is that does include glass into the recycling mix, so you wouldn't have a separate box for bottles, that would go in the recycling bin, so no one would see how many jars of mayonnaise you get through a week. But you'd also have, you know, effectively more capacity, and that would increase our recycling rate and make it simpler for people, and that's the sort of thing we've got to think about, and that's why this engagement is really important, and how do we actually, you know, build engagement with people on an ongoing basis, so that we can encourage them to, you know, change and amend and change their behaviours.
Okay, Councillor Lee, on the engagement point, rather than going.
Yeah, on the engagement point, I was just thinking about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and circular economy. I think I remember seeing some really whizzy videos, and you know, they're quite engaging. So if you want some ideas for engagement, there may be a place to go.
Councillor Powell.
Mine was a question on the emissions trading scheme, Chairman, so when you're ready to take that.
Okay, is that the next slide after? In which case we'll park it for the moment. That's perfect.
Just on meaningful engagement, I mean, if you think about public health campaigns like vaccinations, and you know, one of the things that's often encouraged to do is you sort of say, "I've been vaccinated," or you have that kind of, "I've just been to vote," because then you encourage other people to share in that pro-social behaviour. So you don't tell people to do things; you make sure that they promote it to their peers. So maybe it is flipping it onto that. So maybe it's a case of, you know, rather than saying we as Winchester City Council have got an award for being the best, you know, greenest council, we say we as Winchester are being the best, or even you could have some fun with it. You could have the best recycling ward You know, the highest level of glass recycling was in Councillor Horrell's parishes or something like that. So you could possibly have a little bit of fun in terms of actually promoting where the best recyclers are, or you know, or just sort of saying how successful we've been. Or the other way of flipping it over might be to talk about, rather than the kind of some people don't approve of all this green crap, to quote one of our great leaders of the past, but you might talk about how much money we're saving by not sending to landfill, because obviously that has a cost to it. So you can actually, rather than sort of saying, oh, how much is this costing for these kind of food waste bins or these grey bins, you could say, this is how much we're saving by doing this and not sending it to landfill, because it's saving you taxpayers money. So it could be changing the messaging slightly that way.
If I could just come in now, I mean, your point about messaging and you know, can we? I think there may be something we can do around providing, if you like, councillor or member-friendly things to drop into our own social networks. I think that would help. But one of the things that is messaging, but not as you would know it, is just the action of people putting out their food waste bins by their big bins. I went, you know, I was walking the dog quite late last night, and I was walking around a part of the Kingsway Inn, and all the bins were out, and I was just keeping a mental kind of eye on the right one, keeping account of the ratio of food waste bins out there, and it's definitely gone up over the last few months. Now, I am familiar with where the rollouts are, so it wasn't because we've now rolled out a new area. It was the same area that I was walking in before. Now we're getting sort of 75% of every big bin that's out there has got a food waste bin next to it, and that's higher than it was. So I think there's some of it is just momentum builds, and as other people see others doing it and they hear the stories, they'll start to participate. But that doesn't mean we just don't do any more communication. And I would just drop in here another little story. Unsolicited feedback from, I'm going to say, Mrs. C in Kingswood. He said, it's so much easier picking up the big bin out of, you know, that we have in the kitchen and taking it out to the wheelie bin, because it's so much lighter and it no longer drips all the tea bag drippings all over my slippers. And that was something I'd never even thought about before, but people find those kinds of things, that it's no longer heavy to take out your black bin thing outside, and those stories start to go around. So that sort of thing, we'll try and get that sort of thing communicated, but not referencing Mrs. C.
Okay, so have you got enough on meaningful engagement that we can move on to the next one, not forgetting that we've parked Councillor Powers one for later as well?
Yeah, so the third question is, so you know, we don't have necessarily a direct role in business waste, but it has an impact on our environment, and actually we want to make sure that they're doing as well as they can be. So how should we start to engage with businesses on this? Because the waste sector and what they do potentially has quite a significant impact on them.
Thoughts on that?
Maybe you provide them with some whizzy poster they can stick in their window. I mean, I know of a coffee shop that has upset some of my parishioners because they don't behave well in keeping everything tidy around their commercial waste bin. But if they can demonstrate that, you know, they're going green and they're actually recycling this amount, you know, and each month they have some sort of totalizer, I think, you know, these things can be quite powerful.
Councillor Powers, sorry, go on. Now you started, Councillor Horrell.
Oh no, I'm just sort of off of the tangent, but one of the things impacting a lot of us is still fly tipping, and a lot of that's domestic waste. So our strategy on fly tipping has to be really, really strong at this time. I mean, the numbers around the country are growing, sadly, and obviously we see people just dumping. It's not the bed or the, you know, the rubble, it's other rubbish that is being dumped as well. So just a question of our linkage on making sure that whether businesses who are collecting things or individuals who are just too idle to dispose of it, have a clear understanding that we won't tolerate that as a district, and that we will fine people heavily and take appropriate action. I know we take people to court, but it still feels a small number relatively. But the two areas are linked somehow.
It's been a growing number, hasn't it, in the past?
Yeah,
couple of
so
months?
you're right, it is something we look after. So ID Verdi do clear fly tips usually within 2 days. That's the contractual limit. And actually the results on fly tipping came out today, which is why it's been in the news. And if you're sad enough like I am, you can look through the list of local authorities and you can go to the bottom and have a look at Winchester, and our numbers for 2024-25, which is the numbers that were released, were down by 140 on last year, which was down by some on the year before, which was down by the year before as well. And actually we were one of the, I've also looked across the Hampshire authorities, and we're the authority that's improved the most over the past, over this year. And that's because we've got people who are focused on enforcement, and we clear the fly tips up early and we communicate that to people. And we're really trying to push that. Actually, the number of fly tips has significantly come down. If you drive around Winchester like I do, it's really quite rare, I think, that you do actually see a fly tip which has been sat there for a while, which is really nice to see that in the figures.
Could I just ask a point of clarification? Is that all the total number, or is that including people who've got stuff on private land who have to dispose of it themselves? Because we have a lot of people who end up with it on their drive. We won't do it, so they have to do it for themselves. And how do the numbers get calculated?
So the numbers which are reported nationally aren't all the numbers. They are because we don't collect what happens if it's reported in someone's farm. What we do though is if someone on a farm, and there's been a number of cases in Winchester recently where someone on a farm or on an industrial site has had fly tipping, we've taken the prosecution lead and have prosecuted those people. I think if you look at what's happened recently, a number of the people we prosecuted have been from enforcement on private land. So our fly tip lead, who's a chap called Gary Brown, who worked in Dave's team, is focused on stopping this, not necessarily stopping it just on our land.
That's useful to hear, and again, it's something that we need to get out there to people, because that's quite a strong message that they need to hear.
People on their private land feel a bit abandoned.
So that's really useful. Yeah,
I haven't heard of anyone getting the help to prosecute on private.
So we can share that, because there are cases. I mean, there's been, yes, I can give you some cases, but
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. The main problem for my landowners is that they have to cover clearance cost, and I don't think we do that, do we? Councillor Brophy mentioned landfill. My understanding is that none of our black bin waste goes to landfill; it all goes to the earth at Chinham. So I think we need to check that that's still the case. Regarding the bottle box overflow problem. The problem we have locally is that Hampshire County Council removed the bottle bank from their tip sites, and it was a real pain, quite frankly. What I would love to see on commercial waste is us actually providing a parallel service to commercial establishments and charging them for it. I see the truck going down West Street. It has to go in and out to get to all the residential properties. I see horrible big bins sitting outside commercial establishments and some shops don't take them in soon enough. I would just love to see us doing everything. I don't know if it's viable, but that's my dream, Campbell. Thank you.
I think part of what this is about and how we engage with people is because we are going to become part of a unitary authority in the next 2.5 years, at which point some of the responsibilities that we don't have at the moment, such as the household waste recycling centres, and some of our partners will collect commercial waste. There are local authorities that do that, and you can do that. We don't at the moment, but that might be something that a future local authority chooses to do. And I think equally, if there are household waste recycling centres, a future local authority might choose to open those up to glass again, for example. particularly in areas where glass banks are noisy and close to residents' houses, where a bottle bank might not be. So I think there's a lot that can happen at the moment. If you look across Hampshire, about 5.5% of the material that gets collected goes to landfill, and it's around that level. It's come down, but I think what's really important is the more you recycle and the more we can take material out of the black bag waste stream, the less is incinerated, because even if it goes to landfill, if you look at the city council's overall objectives about carbon emissions, the less stuff you can put into the incinerator, the less carbon emissions you produce. And that's what the emissions trading scheme is being designed to do, is to stop burning plastics and to stop taking stuff to incineration.
And on that note then.
Thank you. So this emission trading scheme, is that a cost to Winchester, or is it a potential income for Winchester if we can reduce our carbon footprint?
At the moment, it's neither, because we're a waste collection authority. So the cost would fall to the disposal authority. But in April 2028, we're going to be part of a unitary authority, which would have collection and disposal costs. So if you look 2 and a bit years down the line, there'll be a new emissions trading scheme that is due to start in April 2028, the same time as unitary authority starts. And the tonnage of material, which at the moment it's about 23,500 tonnes of material in Winchester that goes as black bag waste, there's an emissions trading scheme on that. So if you can reduce the amount of material by recycling more, or producing less waste in the first place, there is then a real corresponding benefit to the unitary authority that will exist, which is why we want to make sure we're engaging with people and changing people's behaviour, because it will have a direct financial impact on the authority we'll be in 2 years' time.
So that has to be part of the story, Chairman, that it's going to save you money, and that was not coming across to me until I saw that, until we had the explanation. So let's get it out there.
And I think it also shouldn't be lost that although from our point of view, if the incinerator is in Chinham, it's like, well, as we have mostly westerly winds, southwesterly winds, it will go somewhere else. Someone else's waste from Dorset or from Southampton is coming our way. So it's in terms of air quality reasons, there's very good reasons to be setting a high standard in what we try and do to get that residual waste down.
Right, given that I'm looking at the clock now, but Councillor Westwood, then Councillor Lee.
Thank you. So as we look into the future, really it's looking now, what we should be looking at is minimising the amount of waste that's created at its root, really. So we are collecting food waste, we're collecting quite a lot of food waste. So one of the messages that we should be putting back is how to minimise that food waste, right? Because we should be driving that number down. Once it's gone up, it should be driven down. The particular beef I have is that when I now look into my black bin and I'm there and I'm not doing as Councillor Bennett does in London, which is to put it all in recycling, except that bit goes in the waste. I'm now going, do we recycle that bit? Yes or no? Do I read this lid? This lid is only recyclable back at your local store. There is a responsibility, well, there used to be, we're going back in your slides, it was the extended producer responsibility back in 25, which really never went anywhere and stopped, as far as I can see. So recycling of bottles and all the rest of it. Surely we've got to push back on the producers of the waste that we're getting. So I'm back to the supermarkets. We've got major supermarkets sitting around Winchester here. I look in my bin now, most of the stuff I'm getting is unnecessary packaging or incorrect packaging that's coming from goods that I don't really need. You know, I get something, I rip it out the first layer and chuck it in the bin. Is it in the recycler in that bin? Then you use the thing and then you use the bit that came in. We've really got to get back. What are we as an organisation doing to push back, you know, on the government, on the producers of this waste to minimise the stuff coming to us to start with? I think that's a really important thing that we need to do.
Brief answer to that. So it's quite difficult for us to do that, which is why the government has brought in, it's from April 2025, extended producer responsibility started. And at that point, So we're still in that financial year at the moment. At that point, Sainsbury's and Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's and all these places have been paying money to the government according to how much packaging they produce. That packaging, so if you look at a box of biscuits, that packaging, you will see, I saw, for example, over Christmas, a tin of biscuits, used to be a tin of biscuits, they're meant to be a plastic tub of biscuits, it's now a cardboard box of biscuits. And that's largely because the material that they are paying for, it is cheaper if they pay for cardboard rather than plastic, and plastic's cheaper than tin. So I'm seeing in my bin, food waste trays are now more often cardboard than not. So I'm seeing that in my bin, and so they are changing their behaviour. And the thing that the government is doing in extended producer responsibility is the amount they're paying for material that is polluting. The cost of that to them is going to go up each year, so that the cost to producers is going to continually rise. And I'm now seeing changes in what goes into my bin, and I think we'll see more of that from companies who realise it's costing them hundreds of thousands of pounds, millions of pounds each year, and they'll start to see some different things. So you should start seeing those differently.
Okay. Quick follow up on that is, do we see some of that money because we're bearing the cost? Does that come back to us, or Hampshire?
Yes, it does come back to us. Yep.
And the final word then, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, so very quickly about narrative and so on. We talk about landfill. I don't hear the term skyfill. You know, we talked about the trading scheme. I think it's a term that some people might resonate with them. And this is monetizing these cleanup costs. Make it loud and clear, because you know, I think that's something that again will land very firmly in the harm to the environment with the financial costs. You know, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we're all done on that. Campbell, thank you very much indeed for presenting that. Hopefully you've got some useful views from that, and I trust you're bookable for annual parish meetings to spread the word to well, for a glass of wine at the end of it probably, and so we can add more to Councillor Horrell's bins. That's clearly where all the good parties are. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation this evening, everybody. And I think we have come, have we? No, we haven't. We've got one. Yes, we have. We are at the end of the agenda. Apart from to note the meeting dates for the committee in 26-27 as set out on the agenda. Let's quickly move back to those. I think you've all, members have all seen these. They've all gone out on the email. I think the Dem Services team have been putting these out in the last week. Bear with. Yes, 8th of July, 17 December, I beg your pardon, 17 September, 1st of December and 20th of February next year. Dates for your diaries. As I say, I think the emails for those have already gone out. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening.